Welcome back. Now, earlier this week, our sister publication, Business Day, broke the news around well-known economist Thabi Leoka and the fact that she does not hold a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics, as she claimed. The allegation surfaced after Remgro parted ways with Leoka, who sits on several other boards, allegedly for misrepresentation of qualifications. And while Leoka has tried to defend this, it seems to date that the qualification does in fact not exist. On the back of this, the Institute of Directors in South Africa, which has seen similar cases, has rehashed the importance of due diligence prior to board appointments. IoDSA CEO Parmi Natesan joins us with a greater detail on the stance. Parmi, a happy new year to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Same to you. Thank you for having me.
Well, Parmi, I'm keen just first of all to get your thoughts here when it comes to verification of board members as they come on board. Where does the responsibility lie? Where does the buck stop?
So what I find interesting is that generally companies perform such detailed and in-depth vetting of employees before they appoint them. So they'll do credit checks, qualification checks, reference checks, ID checks, even criminal checks, right? So it just, makes sense then that equally there should be as an in-depth due diligence and vetting done before non-executive directors are appointed to boards. And it's quite frustrating to see so many times we see questions around qualifications of individuals who already have served on sizable and boards of substance. Now, in terms of where the buck stops, I guess the board itself is responsible for ensuring that governance is complied with in the organization. And therefore there needs to be some sort of accountability, because also you'll notice that some of the entities on which this director used to serve are even your large listed entities, which are, in terms of the listings requirements, required to apply King 4. And King 4 couldn't be more explicit. It says in recommendation 19, and I'm going to read it for you, I've got it in front of me. It says, candidates' backgrounds should be independently investigated and their qualifications should be independently verified. And what was very disappointing for me was, when the questions arose, a number of the boards on which this individual served sort of responded, or it was reported in media that their response was they either felt it wasn't necessary or it wasn't a requirement to do these checks.
So, what's very interesting here, I guess, Parmi, it might even bring to question on how these board members are then appointed. A lot of it is actually through referrals. It's not necessarily a public system. You wouldn't go into LinkedIn, for instance, and see board of directors for a JSE listed company, advertised there. And that tells me that sometimes maybe because of the closed nature of the pool and the way in which the recommendations are done and the appointments are done, this kind of thing can be overlooked, right?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think non-executive director positions get filled in various ways, and one of them, as you mentioned, is by word of mouth. So when there's a vacancy, there's a possibility that they may say around the table, does anyone know someone who would be suitable for this post? And board positions do get filled that way. But I don't feel that should negate the requirement to actually vet whoever it is that's being recommended thoroughly, and to ensure that they meet all of the requirements necessary, and that their CVs are beyond reproach. At the end of the day, it becomes a reputational issue that I think no company or individual really wants. The other nuance, though, with board appointments is some of these larger entities actually use search firms to find the non-executive directors for them. And when an entity uses a search firm, generally you're relying on that search firm to do the checks that you typically would do if you didn't use them. And therefore, I think it's also important for boards to just look at their contracts with their search firms and ensure that, if they're not doing the checks themselves, that there's some sort of requirement in the contract that the search firm is doing these thorough checks before putting candidates forward.
You have spoken about an accountability, issue here, and of course, with the boards that the individual has already served on, and currently maybe even serving on. What would accountability look like at this point, Parmi, when the work has been done, the individual has sat in meetings, they've possibly been parts of decisions that have been made. What would it look like for accountability to be seen here?
So legally, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm speaking from just a general knowledge perspective. I don't think her appointment to those boards is null and void because of this questions around the qualification. I think they still appointed her as they should have legally. And therefore, I don't think it really impacts the decisions that were made by those boards during the tenure that she served. I think, wider than that, there should be obviously accountability for an individual and we don't know, what the truth is here. There's various sides to the story, but if an individual claimed to have a qualification that they didn't have, that's not only a legal issue, but also an ethical issue. And I think that needs to be dealt with, yeah.
I'm also keen, on getting your thoughts about what this might mean even for confidence and investor perspective. We all take it, for granted that if we see on stock exchange news that a director has been appointed to a board, we really take it for granted this has been done, the checks have been done, the T's have been crossed, the I's have been dotted. And this, I think, then might speak of something where this might be more widespread than we don't know. And what does this mean for confidence? Are we seeing ourselves in a place where boards possibly have to go back to the drawing board with all directors and just go back to verifying, qualifications and so on?
Yeah, I definitely think that does impact market confidence. I think it's something shareholders should be asking those boards at the next AGM. How did they do the vetting of directors before bringing them on? I think that's very important. In terms of doing these checks, I think it's just good discipline to do them before appointment. And in fact, at the IoDSA, we actually do them every 3 years when a director is up for re-election. We do them again, even if we know someone very well and don't suspect anything. We do it just for good practice, and for good governance and having the record keeping in place.
I mean, speaking about good governance, best practice rather, and, governance as a whole, Parmi, one of the things I often think is that governance is the forgotten, a child in ESG. And I'm wondering if this is, a reflection of that maybe we just take it for granted. We've had King 3, we now have a King 4. And because governance issues have been in the spotlight for long enough, we might think that it's a given. We might be a little bit too relaxed about issues of governance at a time, I think, when we're actually more prone to manipulation as people.
I think there is some of that. I think what we need to accept is that, governance and the King Code and the recommendations there are not put in place to create a burden for business. They're really put in place for a legitimate purpose. And if there's buy-in that these things are there to serve the entity and actually, do good at the end of the day, I think people will then start applying King 4 in substance instead of in form. At the moment, I think some approach it as a bit of a burdensome compliance checklist. And I do think things then, get forgotten or ignored when they should have been done. I think we need also more accountability in terms of that, because many entities or organizations, if you look at their integrated reports, they'll say that they do apply King 4. But then you'll find instances like this where you in your mind question, well, how well are they doing it? How in depth are they doing it? So I do think, it's something for companies to think about, and boards especially, because they are the custodians of corporate governance in those organizations.
Before I let you go, it is a continuous exercise, this issue of verification and vetting. For instance, you might bring a board member on at the beginning of a tenure with no criminal record. That could change, while the person is on the board. So I'm wondering also, Parmi, from a best practice perspective here, is it to continuously be scanning the environment, checking that, people are who they say they are and that their records are as clean as they say they are? Or is it a matter of if you do it at the beginning, prior to the appointment, then you would have still covered yourself from a governance perspective?
So I don't think it can be a once-off thing. I think you need to do it. So every board should be doing this due diligence, regardless of whether the person serves on other boards and you're then assuming that those other boards checked. You need to check for yourself. And then I think, as I said before, we do it actually every 3 years when a non-executive director is due for re-election. We repeat the exercise anyway. But I think another point I'd just like to make is that and we as IoD as well in our board code of conduct, which sets out what our expectations are for our board members and particularly our non-executive directors. It's very clear there that one of the requirements to be a board member is to proactively come and let us know and disclose if something has changed. So, for example, the instance that you said where someone perhaps has a clean record at the start and then suddenly there's some sort of criminal record on them, the expectation would be that that individual would have proactively come and disclosed and let us know as and when anything happened that affects their standing on the board and their application of the code of conduct.
Well, Parmi, thank you so much for speaking to us on this. I think it's a very pertinent one and apt at this point in South Africa. That was Parmi Natesan. She's CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa.